Next up, I want to make the grooves in the inside faces of these parts here. This is the top, so this is the bottom side. My reference for the grooves is going to be this surface. So I need to make sure all these parts are flush and coplanar. So I'm going to put them in the vise. Of course, I've got everything assembled here. And so this is a little bit high here, so I'm going to so that feels pretty good. Okay, this one is high here. So by taking a short pass and a longer pass and a longer pass, I'm tapering this board. It's tight. Okay, that's almost there. I want to check these other ones. So that one's flush. And that's a little high there. I'm going to go one more here. There we go. And this one's high here. Okay, now when I'm planing over here, it's racking this, so I'm gonna move this over. That should make it a little more solid. I'm not trying not to tighten this too tight. I don't want to break anything. Okay, that's a little more solid. So now that I've got things pretty close, what I'm going to do is plane all the way around. Oops. Okay, so those all feel nice and flush now. So now I'm going to take this apart and start putting in the grooves. Okay, getting this apart can be a little tricky, but I find the easiest way is with a dead blow hammer. I'm just going to kind of hold this up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to start with the ends. I've got the two ends, and I can tell by my marks here that my grooves are going to go down here. I'm going to use a plow plane to make the groove, so these end pieces are going to have a through groove as opposed to on the sides, the tailboards, that'll be a stopped groove. So because I'm making a through groove, I can use this plow plane. I want to set the fence so that the groove just misses these pins here. So I'm going to set the fence so I miss those pins by about a 32nd. I want to check them all. This particular one's a little thicker than the rest, so that's the one that's determining which is the correct place for that. And I also want to make sure, if I measure this, that Okay, so the distance from the fence to the far side of the blade is about 9/16. So I want to make sure that dimension is bigger than the thickness of the bottom. If it was smaller than the thickness of the bottom, then the bottom would actually stick out past this surface. So it's about 9/16, which is about what that is, but I'm gonna plane the bottom down a little bit more than where it is now. So that should work okay. So I can check the depth of cut. That looks good. I'm just sighting down the sole of the plane like I would any other plane. There's a couple of screws here that need to be snugged up. So that all seems like it's set up correctly. Now I need to hold this, and I think that's going to work like that. Now I don't have a lot of surface area there, so I'm going to put a piece of scrap there. I'm going to find something I can put there. Okay, so I just grabbed a couple of little glue sticks. Now, because the fence hangs down here a little bit, I need to make sure this surface is sticking out past the bench. Okay, so that all looks good. That's sticking out a little bit. Oh, I just realized those are going to have to go flat, otherwise I think I'd run into them when I got to my final depth. Okay, I think that's going to work. The one last thing I should check here is the depth. This plane does have a depth stop, although it does have a tendency to move. So I want to go in a quarter of an inch. Tighten that up. Okay, here we go. So this plane can be tippy. All right, the bed is only 1/8 of an inch wide, so you don't have much to balance on. So most of what's aligning this is the fence against the side here. So I'm pushing with my left hand here to get that nice and stable. So most of the pressure is down here. At the top, or on the handle, I want to make sure I'm not pushing up high, because that tends to tip it. So I want to push low when I'm using my hand like that. So we'll start. So there's my first shaving. So 1/4 inch wide. Just, whatever the width of the blade is. And I just need to keep planing until I get to my depth. So like I said, you really have to make sure you don't tip this thing. It's a little tricky. Also, like some of the other things we do, sharpening or whatever, I'm trying not to move my arms solely. I'm trying to move my body. So if I keep my upper body relatively stable, I've got my elbow locked against my side. Now I think, now that I'm starting, I'm going to take a little bigger cut. Okay, I'm getting close to my depth. There we go. So I want to measure just to make sure. So I'm actually a touch over there and a little bit under here. So I'm not sure, like I said, this depth stop's a little flaky. I think it's moved a little bit. So I'm going to ignore it. But it is typical that the end of the cut is deeper than the beginning of the cut. So I'm going to take a couple of partial shavings here. I'll see how that... Okay, so I'm right at a quarter there, a touch under a quarter there. Okay, so that should work. I'll go ahead and do the other one, making sure my marks are in the right spot there. Okay, I've got two good-looking grooves there. Now I will do the stopped grooves on these other parts here. I've got the two side pieces clamped end to end in the on the face vise here. So this particularly need to be careful you don't tighten this too much because it'll pop up here. And I made sure these two bottom edges are aligned. I've made sure I've got my marks correct here. So this is the inside bottom of both those parts. So that will make this easier to do since I have to change the depth setting on this every time I make a pass. Now this is the Veritas router plane. Nice router plane. It does come with a fence, so I need to install the fence. The fence is held on by a screw, and the screw is stored here in the end of this bar. So the fence is going to, if I get this squared away here, it's going to attach here like that, and then we'll use that to guide the router plane. This is always a little tricky. There we go. Okay, so fence is on. Now I need to set the fence in. Of course, I need to match the other distance here. So I'm going to set the cutter into the existing slot and then move the fence up to there. Let me make sure this is tight. Okay, now this cutter's slightly smaller than the one that's there, than the existing groove. So I'm just kind of trying to center it there. Okay, so that's the correct fence setting. Now this tool cuts relative to this surface, so I can't start with the blade way down. I have to start with the blade just barely breaking the surface. So I'm going to loosen up this. So I'm going to get a little closer so you can see what I'm doing. So this tightens the blade. The blade is 1/4 inch wide, and it indexes on this depth adjuster here. So we set the depth here, and then we tighten up the blade here. So I'm going to back this off. So as I sight down the bottom here, it's just barely sticking out. Now, whenever you make an adjustment on this thing, you want to be pushing up on the blade. If you don't, there's some play in here, and you're not going to get a consistent depth each time. So whenever I turn the depth adjuster, I've always got my finger down here and pushing up. Tighten that up, and that looks like a fairly small. I'm going to back that off just a little bit more. we'll see how that does. There is a mark on top here, and at least in the beginning, I'm only going to go a quarter turn at a time. So let's see how that works. Now before I start, I need to mark my beginning and ending spots on here. So I'm going to, from the baseline of the tails, I want to come over a quarter of an inch and scribe a line there. So I'm going to use my marking knife here to do that at each. So I'm going a quarter inch past the baseline into the tail. Okay. So now I can start using the plane. So once again, well, now I've got a big reference here. This doesn't tilt, but I want to make sure that I'm pushing the fence up against there. So I'm starting with the blade right on my mark here, and it's going to push forward. I'm hitting. Okay, I got to fix that. Okay, so that one's sticking up just a touch. Okay, so I'm going right up to my line here. So starting in the line and going right to my line. Now I'm still not quite right here. Those need to be perfectly flush. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now that's as deep as I can go with that setting. So I'm going to put my finger underneath here to push up on the blade. I'm going to loosen the lock knob, and I'm going to turn this by a quarter of a turn, and then I'll do it again. Okay, loosen, quarter turn, tighten. Now, I can only go down I can only make this cut as deep as my scribe line there. So I need to start increasing the depth of my cut there. I'll grab my quarter-inch chisel and get a little more depth there. So I'll have to do this occasionally. Now I'm getting a ramp at the beginning of the cut because I can only cut so deep because of the angle of this cutter. So I'll have to come back when I'm done to finish that up. Now, depending on the wood and how things are going here, you can go more than a quarter turn. I would definitely wait until you're down a little bit, though, before you do that. Half a turn's probably too much. You can probably go a third of a turn. You know, it just kind of depends on the wood, how tame it is, how soft it is. So I'm just going to keep going until I get down to my 1/4 inch depth. Okay, I'm getting near the end, so I'm just going a 1/4 turn at a time. And yeah, I'm right at a 1/4 inch now, so that's great. So now I need to come back from the other direction and do this other side here. So I'm going to take the fence off, put it on the other side, and we'll come in from the other direction. I've backed off the depth of cut, and I'm going to come at this from the other direction now. You can be a little more aggressive now with the depth of cut adjustments. So I'm going to go a whole half, or a half a turn. So I'm not going very far. Do need to be careful though with how far you push. I have had students actually clamp a stop at each end so they don't go too far. So if you think that's a concern, I can certainly understand. All right, so I'll continue going down to my existing depth of cut. Okay, that was the last pass. The cutter's down to the final depth there, so that looks great. So we've got stopped grooves on these two side parts, through grooves on the ends. The grooves go a 1/4 inch past this baseline, which means when these are together, because this is a 1/4 inch deep, the end of that groove will match up with the bottom of that groove. All right, so when the bottom's dry, we'll go ahead and plane that and then make the rabbet so that the bottom fits in these grooves.